The cleaning woman feared for her daughter's future, carrying alone nights of anguish and fear, until a businessman marked by suffering, wounded by his own past, crosses her path and changes everything in an unexpected and definitive way. The white light of the office cut through the darkness of Chicago like an open wound. Michael Roberts watched the sleeping city through the cold glass, but his eyes registered neither the distant lights nor the sparse movement of the streets. All he saw was the blurred reflection of himself, a 41-year-old man who seemed to carry twice that weight on his shoulders. He turned back to the desk. The documents were there, organized in stacks that represented destinies, 217 families to be exact. He had memorized the number like someone memorizes a sentence. Part of those papers already bore his signature, scrawled on days when he still believed that difficult decisions were merely a matter of courage. Only the final submission remained, the click that would transform possibility into reality. Michael opened his laptop, but his fingers hesitated over the keyboard. The screen illuminated his face with a ghostly glow, revealing deep circles under his eyes and a tension he could no longer disguise, even from himself. He took a deep breath, but the air seemed insufficient. His chest tightened. His hands began to tremble. It wasn't the first time. In recent weeks, these attacks had come with increasing frequency, always in the silence of dawn, when there were no meetings to disguise them, nor assistance to witness his weakness. Michael loosened his tie and tried to control his breathing, but each attempt to rationalize the situation only worsened the tightness in his chest. "There's no alternative," he whispered to the void. The words sounded false even to him. He remembered his mother, not the sick woman of recent years, consumed by cancer that stole her piece by piece, but the firm businesswoman who had built that empire with her own hands. She would never have signed those documents. She knew every employee by name, understood each family's struggles, believed that a company was made of people, not numbers. And now he was there, about to betray every principle she had defended. The board said it was necessary. The consultants presented convincing graphs. The competition was aggressive, the market was in crisis, the profit margin needed protection. Everything made sense on paper. But Michael couldn't stop thinking about the faces. People who had worked there for years, who supported families, who woke up early and believed they were part of something greater. He was a traitor, not only to his mother's memory, but to himself, to the man he had imagined being when he assumed the company's presidency. At that moment, he swore he would do things differently, that he would honor her legacy, that he would lead with humanity. And now he was alone in a cold office at 3 a.m, trembling before a decision that would devour him from within. Michael closed his eyes. The room spun slightly. He rested his hands on the desk to steady himself and felt cold sweat on his forehead. He tried counting to 10, a pathetic technique he had read in some article about dealing with anxiety. It didn't work. Nothing worked. Then he heard it. A soft sound, almost imperceptible. The door opening. Light footsteps on the carpet. Michael turned abruptly, wiping his face with the back of his hand, trying to restore the mask of an imperturbable executive. But it wasn't a late director or a guard on patrol. It was a young woman in a simple uniform, pushing a cleaning cart, and behind her 3 small girls, identical with enormous frightened eyes. Sarah froze at the door. Her hands gripped the cart tightly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Roberts," she said quickly, her voice low and tense. "I didn't know you were still here. We'll leave right away." But the triplets didn't move. On the contrary, with strange synchronization, all 3 began walking slowly toward Michael, completely ignoring their mother, who was trying to call them back. Michael was paralyzed. He didn't know what to do. The girls approached without fear, something that even Sarah found strange. They were shy, rarely approached strangers, but there they were, surrounding Michael as if they knew him. The first climbed onto his chair without asking permission. The second held his hand. The third touched his tie with curiosity, tilting her head like a little bird. And then, almost simultaneously, all three said, "Sad man." Michael felt something break inside him. Perhaps it was exhaustion, perhaps surprise, perhaps the absolute purity of that observation. But tears came without warning, silent and inevitable. He tried to hide them, turn his face away, but the small hands of the girls were already on his cheeks, wiping the tears with the tenderness he hadn't received in years. Sarah stepped forward, distressed, but something prevented her from intervening. Perhaps it was the way her daughters, always so withdrawn, seemed completely at ease. Perhaps it was the raw vulnerability of that powerful man crumbling before 3 children. Michael took a deep breath. For the first time in months, the tightness in his chest began to ease. Not because he had found a solution, but because, in that absurd and unexpected moment, he didn't need to pretend he was okay. Sarah didn't know where to look. Her daughters continued clinging to that man as if they had known him for years, and he, the company president, cried silently while holding them carefully, like someone afraid of breaking something precious. The scene was so strange, so outside any logic, that Sarah felt like laughing and crying at the same time. "Sir, I'm sorry." She tried again, stepping forward. "They normally don't do this. I swear I don't know what got into them." Michael quickly wiped his face, trying to regain some composure. But the girls wouldn't let him. Every time he pulled away, they cried softly and held on tighter. It was the first time in a long while that Michael didn't know what to do. There was no protocol for this, no business strategy that taught how to deal with 3 children determined to console him. "It's okay," he said finally, his voice still hoarse. "Let them stay." Sarah blinked, confused. Stay? There? In that enormous office full of expensive and important things. But Michael was already picking up one of the remote controls from the desk and pointing to the leather sofa in the corner of the room. "There's a TV there. There should be some children's channel." The triplets looked at their mother, waiting for permission. Sarah nodded, still dazed, and they ran to the sofa with an excitement they rarely showed. Michael turned on the television, found a cartoon, and lowered the volume. The girls settled in, finally distracted. The silence that followed was awkward. Sarah stood there, not knowing whether she should leave or continue working. Michael returned to behind the desk, but didn't open the laptop. He just stayed there, looking at his hands, as if they belonged to someone else. "How long have you worked here?" he asked suddenly. Sarah was startled. "Almost 2 years, sir. Night shift." "And you always bring them?" She swallowed hard. This could cost her job. "Only when there's no other way. The neighbor who watches them during the day has health problems, and I have no one else to leave them with. I know it's not allowed, but I need the work, and they stay quiet, I swear. They never." "How old are they?" "And 4. They'll be 5 in March." Michael nodded slowly. His eyes went from the girls back to Sarah. For the first time he really saw her. Not as an anonymous cleaning employee, but as a person. Tired face, rough hands from so much work. Worn but clean uniform. A young woman who probably hadn't slept properly in years. Their father. "There's no father," Sarah cut him off. Her voice harder. "He disappeared when I said I was pregnant. Didn't even wait to find out it was 3. The raw honesty of the answer caught Michael off guard. He didn't expect that straightforwardness without detours. Sarah realized she might have said too much and lowered her eyes. "Sorry, I shouldn't have said it like that." "No," said Michael. "It's okay," I asked. Another silence, but this time less uncomfortable. Michael watched the triplets watching the cartoon. They sat properly, well-behaved, and occasionally one would look back just to make sure their mother was still there. "How do you do it?" he asked, and there was something genuine in the question. Alone, 3 children, night work. Sarah shrugged, a tired gesture that said much more than words. I do it because it has to be done. It's not about being strong or brave. It's just, there's no choice. Michael felt those words like a punch to the stomach. No choice. He had spent the entire night convincing himself there was no alternative, that he was trapped, that the fate of 200 families was inevitable. But there was a woman who faced impossibilities every day and still found a way. Have you ever thought about changing shifts? He asked suddenly, working during the day. Sarah laughed without humor. And earn less? Night shift pays overtime? That's what keeps us alive? And during the day, who would take care of them? Michael leaned forward in his chair, thoughtful. There was something in that conversation that was affecting him, shifting certainties he thought were unshakable. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in months, he was talking to someone who wanted nothing from him. Sarah wasn't trying to impress him, manipulate him, or convince him of anything. She was just there, being brutally honest about a difficult life. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said suddenly, surprising herself with her own courage. "Why were you crying?" Michael blinked. The question was so direct, so devoid of malice, that he didn't know how to be offended. He thought about lying, giving a corporate and empty answer, but he looked at the triplets on the sofa, then at Sarah, and realized he was too tired for masks. "Because I'm about to do something terrible," he said simply, "and I don't know if I can live with it afterward." Sarah frowned, but didn't press. She just nodded, as if she understood that there were pains that didn't fit in explanations. She took the cleaning cloth from the cart and began wiping the furniture, slowly, respecting the silence. Michael closed the laptop. He looked at the clock, 4:30 in the morning. He still had time, not to decide, but to postpone. And on that strange dawn, when 3 children had consoled him without knowing why, postponing seemed the only sensible thing to do. "Thank you," he said suddenly. Sarah stopped, confused. "For what?" "For being here, for being honest, for, I don't know, for letting them stay." Sarah smiled for the first time, a small but real smile. "I think they needed to stay. I don't know why, but they needed to." Michael agreed silently, and while the triplets watched cartoons and Sarah quietly finished cleaning, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a little peace. Michael didn't send the documents that dawn, not the next one either, not the one after that. The following days passed in a kind of strange fog. He continued attending meetings, signing papers, making operational decisions, but something fundamental had changed. It was as if a lens that distorted everything had been removed, and now he saw the company with different eyes. He saw the people. The security guard at the entrance, who always greeted him with a tired smile. The receptionist, who answered the phone with infinite patience, even when customers were rude. The maintenance staff who worked weekends so everything would function perfectly on Monday. And Sarah, especially Sarah. He began to notice her, not consciously at first, but gradually he realized he was paying attention to schedules. He knew she arrived at 11 at night and left at 7 in the morning. He knew she always brought the triplets on Thursdays and Fridays when the neighbor went to the doctor. He knew she never complained, even when she had to clean entire areas alone because another employee had called in sick. It was on one of those Thursdays that Michael made a decision he couldn't fully explain. He was in the elevator, going down to a meeting, when he saw Sarah in the 10th floor corridor, pushing the cart with a broken wheel. The triplets were sitting on the floor near her, drawing on papers that had probably come from the trash. He got off the elevator. "Good morning," he said, and Sarah almost dropped the bucket. "Mr. Roberts." She straightened up quickly, cleaning her hands on her uniform. "I didn't know you were. I need to talk to you. Can it be now?" Sarah looked at her daughters, then at the cart, clearly panicking. "I'm in the middle of work, sir. I can finish first and then—" "It's not about work." "Well, it is, but not the way you're thinking." The triplets looked up from their drawings. One of them, the one with a small scar on her eyebrow, smiled when she recognized him. Michael felt something warm in his chest. "There's an empty conference room there," he pointed. 5 minutes. Sarah had no choice. She called the girls, who obediently put away their crayons and followed her. Michael opened the door to the room, turned on the lights, and waited for everyone to enter. The triplets immediately went to the window, fascinated by the view of the illuminated city. "Sit," said Michael, indicating one of the chairs. Sarah obeyed, tense, hands clasped in her lap. He took a deep breath. He had rehearsed this mentally dozens of times, but now that he was face to face with her, the words seemed inadequate. "I have a proposal for you," he began. "I want to offer you an administrative position, assistant in the Human Resources Department. Salary 3 times higher than current, day shift, full benefits. And you can bring the girls. We have a room that's not being used. It could become a space for them during the day." Sarah blinked, then blinked again. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "I know you don't have experience in the area," Michael continued quickly, interpreting the silence as doubt. "But you'll have training, and I've seen how you organize work, how you deal with unexpected situations, how you communicate. You have potential." Are you serious?" Sarah's voice came out trembling, almost inaudible. "Completely." Sarah stood up suddenly, the chair creaking on the floor. Her hands were shaking. "I can't." Michael frowned. "What do you mean you can't?" "I can't. I don't know how to do these things. I barely finished high school. I don't know how to use computers properly. I don't know how to speak nicely. I don't know. I'm not right for this. Sarah. And people will look at me, and they'll know. They'll know I shouldn't be there. They'll laugh at me, talk behind my back, wait for me to fail." The words came out fast now, almost stumbling over each other. "And I will fail, Mr. Roberts. I'll fail a lot. And when that happens, you'll regret having done this charity." "It's not charity." "Then what is it?" She stared at him, eyes shining with contained tears. "Why would a man like you want to help someone like me?" Michael was silent for a moment. It was a good question, one he had asked himself several times in recent days. Why? Because she was kind that dawn? Because her daughters had consoled him? Because he needed to do something good to compensate for what he almost did? "Because I'm trying to be a better person," he said finally, with an honesty that surprised even him, "and because I believe you deserve this chance." Sarah shook her head, tears finally flowing. "I don't deserve anything, sir. I'm not special. I'm just another person trying to survive." "And isn't that enough?" The triplets, sensing the tension, approached their mother. The smallest held her hand. The middle one rested her head on her leg. The oldest, as always, just observed Michael with those enormous, serious eyes. "Sad man wants to help Mommy," she said suddenly. Michael smiled for the first time. Yes, the sad man wants to help. Sarah sobbed and covered her face with her hands. Her whole body shook with the crying she had tried to contain her entire life, the crying of someone who had carried too much weight for too long, the crying of someone who didn't allow herself to believe in good things because disappointments hurt less when you already expected them. Michael didn't know what to do. He wasn't good with emotions, never had been. But he extended his hand and lightly touched her shoulder, a small gesture that said, "I'm here." "Think about it calmly," he said softly. "You don't need to decide now. But at least consider it, for the girls, for yourself." Sarah cleaned her face with the back of her hand and nodded, still unable to speak. Michael waited another moment, then headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. You're stronger than you imagine, Sarah, and definitely not just another. The door closed behind him, and Sarah stayed there, surrounded by her daughters, trying to process what had just happened. For the first time in a long while, a small spark of hope began to shine, where before there had only been exhaustion. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Not the next one either. Michael's proposal echoed in her mind like a scratched record, always returning to the same point. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed? What if she made a fool of herself in front of people who studied, who knew things, who belonged to that world? The triplets noticed something was different. They always noticed. On Saturday morning, while Sarah prepared weak coffee and bread with margarine, the three sat at the kitchen table and watched her in silence. It was unsettling, that way they had of reading people. "Mommy's scared," said Emma, the middle one. "No, I'm not," Sarah lied automatically. "Yes, you are," insisted Sophie, the smallest. "You're making that face." Grace, the oldest and always the most direct, crossed her little arms. "Is it because of the sad man?" Sarah sighed and sat down with them. There was no point lying to her own daughters. They saw through her like glass. "The sad man offered me a new job, a better job during the day with more money." The three little eyes lit up. "So we could stay with you during the day?" asked Sophie hopefully. "Yes, you could." "Then why don't you want to? How do you explain to 4-year-olds the weight of fear? How do you tell them that the world isn't kind to those who come from below, that there are places where she wouldn't be welcome, that there's a huge gap between cleaning offices and working in them? Because it's complicated, sweetheart." "But you always say we have to try," Grace reminded her. "When we're scared to go to school, you tell us to be brave." The childish logic was cruel in its simplicity. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Later, while the girls played in the small backyard, Sarah went to the neighbor's house. Mrs. Peterson was 73 years old, had arthritis in her hands and a sharp tongue that hid a soft heart. She was on the terrace, watering her plants with slow, careful movements. "I came to thank you for taking care of the girls," said Sarah, "and to tell you that. Maybe you won't need to anymore. Sometimes." Mrs. Peterson turned, arching an eyebrow. "Found someone better than me?" "It's not that. It's that an opportunity came up, for work, during the day." The old woman sat in the plastic chair, indicating that Sarah should do the same. "And what's the problem? You look like you're at a funeral." Sarah told everything. The dawn when the girls consoled Michael, the unexpected proposal, the salary 3 times higher, the paralyzing fear of not being enough. Mrs. Peterson listened in silence, with that complete attention that only older people know how to give. When Sarah finished, the neighbor was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. "Are you stupid or are you pretending?" Sarah blinked, shocked. "Mrs. Peterson." "No, let me talk." The old woman leaned forward, eyes fixed on Sarah's. "I've known you since you arrived here, pregnant and alone, with nowhere to fall dead. I saw you raise 3 children with less than nothing. I saw you work until your body screamed in pain. I saw you cry hidden so they wouldn't see, and get up the next day smiling as if everything was fine. But this is different. It's different nothing. It's just another challenge, except this time someone's giving you a hand, and you're going to refuse. Why? Because you're afraid of failing. Everyone fails, girl. The difference is that rich people fail in air-conditioned offices, and you fail in the early morning carrying buckets." Sarah swallowed hard. Mrs. Peterson's words were harsh, but there was truth in them. "And another thing," continued the old woman, her voice softer now. "You can be afraid for yourself, but you don't have the right to be afraid for them." She pointed to the backyard, where the triplets were playing. "Those girls look at you like you're the strongest woman in the world, and you are. But strength isn't just taking hits. Sometimes it's accepting help. Sometimes it's believing you deserve good things. Tears returned, hot and inconvenient. Sarah tried to wipe them away, but more came. What if I disappoint him? What if I can't do it? What if you can? Mrs. Peterson held Sarah's hand with her gnarled fingers. What if your daughters grow up seeing their mother had the courage to try? What lesson do you want them to learn? That we give up before we start, or that we fight? Sarah sat there, in that cheap plastic chair, holding the hand of an old woman who could barely take care of herself, but had more wisdom than any executive in a suit. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine. Imagine the girls growing up in a safe place. Imagine herself working while the sun was still in the sky. Imagine that maybe, just maybe, she deserved that chance. On Monday morning, Sarah returned to the building, not during the night shift, but at 9 o'clock, the time Michael had mentioned. She wore her best clothes, which were still simple and worn, but clean and pressed. The triplets wore matching dresses that Sarah had sewn from scraps. It wasn't much, but it was the best she had. Her heart was beating so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She went up to the top floor, legs shaking, the girls silent at her side, feeling their mother's tension. Michael's secretary looked at her strangely. "Can I help you?" I came to talk to Mr. Roberts. He said that. He offered me." The woman frowned, clearly confused, but before she could respond, the office door opened. Michael was there, and when he saw Sarah, something softened in his face. "Sarah." He said her name as if it were important. "You came." I thought a lot." Her voice came out trembling but firm. "And I want to accept. I want to try. I don't know if I'll be good, but I want to try." A small, genuine smile appeared on Michael's face. "Then welcome. We'll make it work." He extended his hand. Sarah looked at it for a second. That hand that had probably never held a broom, that signed documents that changed lives, and then she extended her own hand, calloused and rough. When they touched, it was more than a greeting, it was a pact. A man trying to be better met a woman trying to believe she could be more. Neither of them knew what would come next, but in that moment there was something powerful in the room. Hope. The triplets smiled. Grace took Michael's free hand and said, with the absolute certainty of children, "Now nobody will be sad." If only it were that simple. The first days were silent torture. Sarah arrived early, always 15 minutes before time, with the triplets clean and tidy. Michael had prepared a small room on the same floor as HR with some toys, cushions, and children's books. The girls stayed there while Sarah tried to learn a job for which she felt completely unprepared. Everything was strange. The computer responded too slowly or too quickly. The programs had names that made no sense. People spoke in acronyms she needed to write down to research later. KPI, ROI, BP. Sarah smiled, wrote everything down, and at night, at home, cried in frustration while the daughters slept. Patricia, the human resources manager, didn't make it easy. She was a woman in her 50s, hair pulled back in an impeccable bun, always aligned suits, and a look that seemed to measure people's worth in seconds. She had worked with Michael's mother for years and carried fierce loyalty to the company's old days. From the first day, she made clear what she thought of Michael's decision. "So you're the new assistant," said Patricia when Sarah was introduced, the tone polite but icy. "Interesting. We normally require at least a complete college degree for this position. But Mr. Roberts believes in differentiated opportunities." Sarah felt blood rise to her face. "I'll work very hard to learn." "I'm sure." Patricia's smile didn't reach her eyes. "After all, this company was built with effort. I hope you're up to the legacy." The following weeks were an endurance test. Patricia delegated tasks explaining only once at an impossible speed, then showed surprise when Sarah asked for clarification. Important documents were delivered without context. Deadlines were mentioned casually and demanded rigidly. "You didn't send the consolidated report," Patricia would ask loudly in front of other people. "But I mentioned that yesterday. You wrote it down, didn't you?" Sarah had written it down, yes, but among 15 other tasks, with terms she was still learning, with formatting she had never seen. She stayed later, took work home, woke up earlier. The triplets began asking why Mommy was always so tired now. The other HR employees weren't cruel, but they didn't help either. There was a polite distance, conversations that stopped when she approached, lunches she wasn't invited to. Sarah understood. She was different. She came from another place. She didn't belong. It was Michael who noticed first. He passed by the department one afternoon and saw Sarah hunched over the desk, shoulders curved, typing slowly on a document full of complex formatting. There was tension in every movement, as if she were about to break. "How's it going?" he asked, approaching. Sarah was startled, straightening up quickly. "Fine, Mr. Roberts, I'm learning." "Is Patricia helping you?" "Oh, yes, she's very efficient." Michael knew Patricia for years. He knew that tone of voice, that cutting efficiency that was more punishment than teaching. "Sarah, if there's any problem, there's no problem." She forced a smile. "It's just a lot of new things, but I'll manage." He wanted to insist, but something in the way she closed off prevented him. Michael knew how to recognize pride when he saw it. Sarah wasn't going to ask for help, wasn't going to admit she was drowning. Not to him, who had risked his reputation by hiring her. But the situation got worse. In an alignment meeting, Patricia presented the payroll numbers. In the middle of the presentation, she turned to Sarah. "You checked the night shift calculations as I asked, didn't you?" Sarah froze. Patricia had mentioned something about this, but it had been among a huge list of tasks, all urgent. She had prioritized what seemed most important. I haven't finished that part yet." "Haven't finished," Patricia repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "So the numbers I'm presenting could be wrong, in front of the board." She looked at Michael. "Mr. Roberts, perhaps we should reschedule this meeting. We can't present unverified data." Michael saw what was happening. He saw it clearly. But he also knew that intervening now would be worse. It would make it seem that Sarah really wasn't capable, that she needed constant protection. "Patricia, present with the data you have. Sarah, you check and send me an addendum by the end of the day." "Yes, sir." Sarah's voice was almost inaudible. The meeting continued, but Sarah barely listened. She felt the looks, the silent disapproval. This is what happens when you put someone unprepared in an important position, those looks said. This is what happens when you mix charity with business. When she finally managed to leave, she went straight to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall. She didn't cry. She had no more tears. She just breathed deeply, trying to contain the trembling in her hands. She was failing, exactly as she had feared would happen. That night, after the girls fell asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. The words came easily because they were true. "Mr. Roberts, I really appreciate the opportunity you gave me, really. But I think we both made a mistake. I'm not good at this. No matter how hard I try, I can't keep up, and this is hurting the work and making you look bad in front of important people. I'll go back to my old job. The company needs someone better in this position, someone who knows what they're doing. Sorry for wasting your time, Sarah." She folded the letter carefully, put it in an envelope, and stored it in her purse. Tomorrow she would deliver it personally, before things got even worse, before she became a complete joke. Sarah lay down in bed, but sleep didn't come, only the certainty that there were some doors that weren't made for people like her to open. And that was okay. She had survived before. She would survive again. But something hurt deep in her chest. It wasn't just defeat. It was what the triplets had said that morning, excited. "Mommy, today at school I said you work in an office." The pride in those small voices, the way Grace had drawn a figure in important work clothes and written underneath in crooked letters, "My mom." Sarah turned on her side and finally let the tears fall on the pillow. Silent, bitter, inevitable. Michael arrived early the next morning and found the envelope on his desk. His name was written in hesitant, almost childish handwriting. He knew, even before opening it, what it was about. He read the letter once, then read it again. Each word was a punch to the stomach. Not because of the decision itself, but because of the passive acceptance of defeat, the way Sarah took all the blame, as if failing were a defect exclusively hers. He left the office and went straight to HR. Sarah was at her desk, packing her few belongings in a cardboard box. Shoulders curved, slow movements of someone who had already given up. The triplets were in the little room next door, too quiet for children that age, as if they sensed something was wrong. "Sarah." She turned, eyes red. "Mr. Roberts, I was going to deliver the letter personally, but I don't accept it." "What?" Michael entered the room and closed the door. He held the letter in one hand. With the other, he took the paper and deliberately tore it in two, then in four, then into pieces so small they couldn't be put back together. "I said I don't accept it. But you read it. You know I can't do it, that I'm getting in the way. You're making mistakes. It's different." Michael pulled up a chair and sat in front of her, something he never did. There, at the same level, without the barrier of hierarchy. "Everyone makes mistakes, Sarah. I make mistakes. The difference is that when I make mistakes, people say it was strategic. When you make mistakes, they say you're not good enough. But it's true. I don't know how to do these things." "You don't know yet. Not. That's the word you're forgetting." He leaned forward. "Do you think I was born knowing how to run a company? That I never made a wrong prediction, never made a stupid decision, never made a fool of myself in a meeting?" Sarah remained silent, eyes down. "I remember the first time I presented to the board. I was 27, just back from Europe with a business degree and thinking I knew everything. I froze in the middle of the presentation, forgot the numbers, got stuck, turned red as a pepper. Do you know what my mother did?" Sarah shook her head. "She waited for me to finish embarrassing myself, then in front of everyone said, 'Great. Now you know what it's like to fail. Next time will be better.' And it was, not because I was special, but because she didn't let me give up. But you had preparation. You studied. I didn't. You have something that half the people in this company don't have. You know what it's like to really work. You know what it's like to have no choice but to find a way. And you have courage. Real courage. Not that executive courage that appears when there's a safety net." He pointed to the torn letter. "Writing this, admitting you failed, that's courage too, but it's the wrong courage." "Then what do I do?" Her voice came out broken. "I try, I study, I stay late, and it's still not enough. People look at me like I'm a fraud, and maybe they're right." Michael sighed. He needed to be honest, but also precise. "You want to know the truth? You're good with people. I saw you talking to the cleaning staff, the security guard, the cafeteria lady. You remember names, ask about families, really listen. But you're being suffocated by processes and spreadsheets that someone created to seem complicated on purpose. So I really don't fit. No. So you're in the wrong place within the right place." Michael stood up. "Patricia is excellent with numbers and processes, but she's terrible with people. The last time she asked how someone really was. Never, probably. You have what she doesn't have. She has what you don't have. The problem is she's treating you as a threat instead of a compliment." Sarah wiped her eyes. "And what changes that?" "I'm going to change it." Michael's voice became firmer. "But you need to promise me something. Stop assuming the mistake is always yours. Stop apologizing for existing in the same space as other people, and especially stop writing resignation letters without talking to me first." She sobbed a wet laugh. "Will you tear them all up?" "All of them, as many as necessary." Michael opened the door and without warning walked straight to Patricia's office. Sarah followed him, heart racing. Patricia was on the phone, but hung up when she saw Michael enter. "Mr. Roberts, can I help you?" "You can, yes. I need to talk about Sarah." Patricia's face closed subtly. "If it's about yesterday, It's not about yesterday. It's about every time." Michael didn't sit down. He stood, and there was something different in his posture, something Sarah had never seen, authority that didn't need to shout. "You're an exceptional professional, Patricia. My mother trusted you, and I trust you too. But you're sabotaging Sarah." "I absolutely am not." "You are, and I understand why. You think I'm being sentimental, that I'm mixing business with emotions, that this will end badly. But you know what? You're right about one thing. I am being emotional, because I almost did something terrible to this company. Almost sacrificed 200 families because the numbers said it was necessary. And a woman and 3 children reminded me that numbers aren't people." Patricia paled. "Are you still considering the cuts?" "No, not anymore, because there will be another way. There always is. But I'm not going to find that way looking only at spreadsheets. I'm going to find it looking at people." He paused. "Sarah isn't perfect. She makes mistakes. But she sees things we've lost the ability to see, and instead of teaching what she needs to learn, you're proving she doesn't deserve to be here. That ends today." The silence that followed was dense. Patricia looked at Sarah, then at Michael. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, but there was contained anger. "I understand. I'll adjust my approach. I don't want you to adjust. I want you to teach, really, with patience, like you would with any other developing professional." Michael turned to leave, but stopped. "And Patricia, if you can't do that, let me know. No resentments. But I won't let anyone here, no matter how long they've worked at the company, treat another employee as less than human." He left. Sarah stood there for a second, not knowing what to do. Patricia stared at her with an indecipherable expression. "You can go," Patricia said finally. "Tomorrow we start over. The right way this time." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Sarah returned to her desk with wobbly legs. She put the cardboard box under the chair. She went to the little room where the triplets were and found them drawing. Grace looked up. "Mommy's not leaving?" Sarah knelt and hugged all 3 tightly. "No, sweetheart, Mommy's not leaving." That night, lying in bed, Sarah still felt her hands shaking. But it wasn't fear anymore. It was something else, something fragile and new, something that looked very much like dignity. The following weeks were different, but not exactly easy. Patricia fulfilled what Michael demanded, but with a professional coldness that made it clear this was obligation, not choice. She explained tasks in more detail, corrected Sarah's mistakes without public humiliation, but there was a calculated distance in each interaction. It was like working with an instruction manual, functional but soulless. Still, Sarah learned. Slowly, stumbling a lot, but she learned. She discovered she had a facility with direct service, that she could talk to nervous employees and extract information that never appeared on official forms. When someone from the factory floor came to HR with a problem, it was Sarah they looked at, not Patricia. She was a bridge between worlds that rarely communicated, but tension in the company grew for other reasons. Michael had made decisions that shocked the board and directors. He cancelled executive bonuses, including his own. He renegotiated contracts with suppliers who'd been overcharging for years. He created a psychological assistance program for employees. He hired a consulting firm to review internal processes, seeking efficiency without layoffs. "He's going crazy," Sarah heard a director comment in the elevator. "Since his mother died, he's different. Too sensitive for this market." The last straw came on a Thursday morning. Michael received a call from Robert Castella, CEO of one of the biggest partner companies. Castella Group was responsible for 20% of annual revenue. Robert requested an urgent meeting, and his tone left no doubt it wasn't a conversation Michael wanted to have. They met in Michael's office. Robert was a 60-year-old man, impeccable suit, watch that cost more than a car. He quickly dispensed with formalities. "Michael, I'll be direct. We're considering ending our partnership." The silence that followed was heavy. Michael didn't blink. "Can I know the reason?" "You know the reason." Robert leaned forward. "Your company is becoming a joke in the market. Mental health program, psychological assistance, cleaning lady becoming manager. Sorry, but this is business, not charity. Sarah isn't a manager, and she was a cleaning lady. She's not anymore." "Whatever. The point is, you're putting sentiment ahead of results. Your numbers are still good, but the perception, Michael, you're being seen as weak, and we can't associate our brand with weakness." Michael felt anger rising but controlled it. "Our numbers are good because the changes are working. Productivity increased 8% last quarter. Absenteeism dropped. Turnover plummeted. For now, but do you think this is sustainable? You're creating expectations you won't be able to maintain. And when the bill comes, what will you do? Fire everyone anyway? Then it'll be worse. Because you sold an illusion." "It's not an illusion. It's investment in people." Robert laughed, but it was humorless laughter. "Michael, I liked your mother. She was tough but fair, knew how to separate heart from wallet. You're mixing everything, and you'll regret it." "So you're terminating the contract?" "I am, unless you go back on these reforms. Cut the nonsense. Get back to basics and we'll continue as partners. But the way it is, no way." Michael was silent for a long moment. He thought about the contracts, the revenue, the impact that losing Castella would have. He also thought about Sarah, the triplets, the 200-plus employees who were almost fired, the security guard who now greeted him with less fear in his eyes, the cafeteria woman who for the first time felt heard when she complained about kitchen conditions. "Then we end the partnership," Michael said finally. Robert blinked, surprised. He expected negotiation, retreat, maybe even pleading. "Are you serious?" "Completely. If the condition for doing business with you is treating my team as disposable, then I don't want to do business." You'll regret this." "Maybe, but at least I'll regret it being who I want to be, not who you think I should be." Robert stood up, adjusted his jacket. "Good luck, Michael. You'll need it." And he left, slamming the door with calculated force. Michael was alone in the office. His hands were shaking. He had just thrown away 20% of the company's revenue. The board would go crazy. Some directors would probably ask for his resignation. He could have backed down, negotiated, found a middle ground. But he couldn't. Not anymore. He opened the drawer where he kept his mother's diary. The underlined phrase was still there. "A leader's greatest risk is forgetting the names behind the numbers." He read it again and felt something firm inside him. Fear, yes, but also certainty. News spread fast. By the end of the day, everyone knew Castella had broken off. Rumors ran wild. The company would go bankrupt. Michael was incompetent. It was a matter of time before layoffs really began. Sarah heard everything. She also heard veiled accusations. If Michael hadn't been distracted by social projects, this wouldn't have happened. If he had kept focus on what mattered, the partnership would be secure. And somehow, even without anyone saying it directly, Sarah felt that part of the blame fell on her. She was the symbol of the changes. living proof that Michael had lost his way. She tried to continue working, but concentration wouldn't come. The triplets noticed she was different when they came to pick her up at the end of the workday. Grace held her hand tightly. "Mommy, you're sad again." "No, sweetheart, just tired." But Grace didn't believe it, and that night, after putting the girls to bed, Sarah sat in the kitchen and cried. Not from frustration this time, but from guilt. Michael had risked everything, for her, for an ideal. She wasn't sure, but she knew the price was being too high. The next day, Michael called a general meeting, all employees from all sectors. It was unusual, almost unprecedented. People crowded into the auditorium, tense, expecting the announcement of cuts that now seemed inevitable. Michael went up on stage. No slides, no presentation, just him, a microphone, and the truth. "You already know we lost Costello," he began. Murmurs ran through the room. "And you probably heard it's because I'm doing things wrong, that I'm being too sentimental, too soft, that I'm putting this company at risk." He paused, looked at the people, known faces, names he now knew by heart. "Maybe it's true. Maybe I am wrong. But I'll tell you one thing, I'd rather be wrong trying to do right than be right doing wrong. Costello wanted me to go back on the changes, wanted me to treat you like numbers again, and I won't do that." The silence was absolute. "It's going to be difficult. We'll have to work harder, be more creative, find new partners. But we'll do it together, and nobody here will be sacrificed to maintain the appearance of success." He came down from the stage. There were no dramatic applause or emotional speeches, just thoughtful silence, people processing what they had heard. But when Michael passed through the corridor, some employees made a point of shaking his hand. Not many, but enough. Sarah was at the back of the auditorium. Her eyes met his for a second, and in that look there was something new, not just gratitude, but respect. And perhaps the fragile beginning of something neither of them yet knew how to name. The following weeks were chaotic. Costello's departure opened a financial wound that couldn't be ignored. The board demanded daily meetings, directors pressed for drastic measures, and the tension in the air was palpable. Michael barely slept, spent entire nights redoing projections, searching for alternatives, trying to prove his decision hadn't been just naive idealism. But then something unexpected happened. 3 smaller companies who had been following Michael's stance made contact. They weren't giants like Costello, but together they represented interesting potential. One of them even explicitly mentioned wanting to work with a company that put people first. It wasn't enough to compensate for the immediate loss, but it was a beginning, a light at the end of the tunnel. Michael clung to that possibility like a shipwrecked person clings to a piece of wood. Meanwhile, Sarah faced her own battles. The triplets got sick. Nothing serious, just a strong flu that hit all 3 at the same time, but enough to leave them feverish and weepy. Sarah had no choice but to miss work. She called early, her voice loaded with guilt, explaining the situation. "Take it easy," said Michael when he answered personally. "Take care of them. Work can wait." But not everyone thought that way. Of course she missed, Sarah heard when she returned 3 days later. It was a conversation in the hallway. 2 employees who didn't notice her presence. Sick child is always the perfect excuse. I bet they weren't even really sick. I warned that this would happen. You can't trust a single mother with young children. There's always something. Sarah was paralyzed behind the wall. The pain of those words was physical, as if someone had stuck a knife between her ribs. She thought about turning and confronting them, but what would she say? That her daughters had spent 3 nights with fever, that she had barely slept, taking care of all 3 at the same time, that she had returned to work still exhausted because she couldn't afford more absences. Instead, she swallowed hard and kept walking, pretending not to have heard anything. But the humiliation didn't stop there. At the end of that week, Sarah made a mistake, a big mistake. She was processing a timesheet when, in exhaustion and haste, she switched values between two columns. The system showed wrong payments for 17 employees. It wasn't irreversible, but required urgent manual corrections, finance department involvement, explanations to those affected. It was the kind of error that caused chain disruption. Patricia discovered it first. Her expression was unreadable when she called Sarah to her office. "Sit." Sarah obeyed, heart racing. She knew before Patricia even opened her mouth. "Did you see this?" Patricia turned the monitor, showing the spreadsheet highlighted in red. I saw. It was my mistake. I switched the columns accidentally." "Accidentally," Patricia repeated emotionlessly. "Do you have any idea how much work this will take to fix? The embarrassment for employees who received wrong amounts?" "I know. I'll fix it. You've already done enough damage." Patricia closed the laptop. "I'll solve it. You stay away from this." The way she said it, the tone she used, made Sarah feel smaller than an insect. She left the room with wobbly legs and went straight to the bathroom. She locked herself in a stall and let the tears come. Silent, bitter, loaded with shame. She had proven all the critics right. She was exactly what they said. Unprepared, incapable, a risk. When she finally managed to compose herself and return to her desk, she found an envelope. No name, just left there. Sarah looked around, but there was nobody nearby. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside, a printed message, unsigned. "Some people weren't made for certain places. You're embarrassing yourself and the man who believed in you. Be kind to everyone and leave while you still have dignity." Sarah read it once, then again. The words blurred on the page, wet with tears that returned without warning. Someone had taken the trouble to write this, print it, leave it on her desk. Someone wanted her to disappear, and maybe they were right. She put the letter in her purse, got her things, and went to get the triplets. They were in the little room, still a bit pale from the flu, but happy to see their mother. Grace immediately noticed something was wrong. "Mommy, let's go home, my love." That night, after the girls fell asleep, Sarah reread the letter. Each word was slow poison. Embarrassing, dignity, wasn't made for this. She thought about Michael, how he had risked everything, how she was becoming exactly what the critics said, a mistake. She took paper and pen and began to write. Not a formal letter this time, but something from the heart. "Michael, I tried. I swear I tried. But every time I make a mistake, it's not just my mistake, it's yours too. People look at you and think you're wrong, and it's not fair. You don't deserve this. I can't stand being living proof that you made a bad decision anymore. Can't stand seeing people whispering, looking at me like I'm a fraud. And worse, I'm starting to believe they're right. You're a good man. Too good. Maybe, and I don't want to be the reason you fall. So this time, I'm really leaving. Don't go back on it. Don't tear up the letter. Let me go. Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. Sarah." She folded the letter, but didn't put it in the envelope yet. She sat there at the kitchen table, looking at that piece of paper that represented giving up. Mrs. Peterson appeared at the window, knocking lightly. Sarah let her in. The old woman sat without being invited, her sharp gaze scanning Sarah's swollen face. "You have that look again." "What look?" "Of someone who's giving up." Sarah didn't deny it. She had no strength. She told everything. The mistake, the anonymous letter, the constant feeling of not belonging, of causing more harm than good. Mrs. Peterson listened in silence. When Sarah finished, the old woman sighed deeply. "Can I ask you a question?" "Yes." "That man, Roberts, do you think he's stupid?" Sarah frowned. "No, he's very intelligent." "Then why do you think he would put a stupid, incapable and inadequate person in an important position? That would be stupid, wouldn't it?" It's not that. It's exactly that. Mrs. Peterson leaned forward. You're calling him an idiot every time you say you're not good enough, because if you're not good enough, then his decision was idiotic. But have you thought that maybe he sees something in you that you're too blind to see? But I made a serious mistake today. So what? Mistakes get fixed. What doesn't get fixed is cowardice. The words hit Sarah like a slap. Mrs. Peterson had no pity, never did, and maybe that was exactly what Sarah needed. Do you want your daughters to learn what? That when it gets difficult, we run away, or that we get up, clean our mouths and continue? Sarah was silent. She looked at the letter, at the words she had poured onto the paper. I don't know if I can continue. Nobody knows. We only find out by trying. Mrs. Peterson got up, with those slow movements of someone carrying 80 years on their shoulders. Before leaving, she turned one last time. And another thing, girl. Whoever wrote that anonymous letter, they're a coward. And you're not. Don't be. The door closed. Sarah was alone with her thoughts, with the resignation letter, with the choice she needed to make. She didn't sleep that night. But when the sun rose, the letter was still on the table, not in the envelope, not on its way to Michael. Just there. Waiting. Sarah arrived at work the next day with swollen eyes, but with raised shoulders. The letter stayed home, stored in a drawer. Not torn up because the temptation was still there, but also not delivered. It was a fragile middle ground, but it was what she could manage at that moment. Michael saw her arrive and immediately noticed something had happened. He knew that posture. Chin up, but wounded eyes. It was the posture of someone who decided not to give up, but paid a high price for it. He waited until the end of the morning and then went to her desk. I need to talk to you. In my office. Sarah felt her stomach turn. He had discovered the spreadsheet error. He was going to fire her personally, with kindness, because Michael was kind even when he needed to be tough. She followed him down the hallway, each step seeming to weigh a ton. When the door closed, Michael didn't go behind the desk. He sat on the sofa and indicated she should do the same. There was something different in the air, an informality that made Sarah even more nervous. I know about the spreadsheet error, he began. That was it. Sarah lowered her eyes. I know an apology doesn't solve it, but I'm not talking to punish you. I'm talking because I did worse. She looked up, confused. In my second year as president, I authorized an equipment purchase without proper auditing. We lost almost $2 million in defective machinery. $2 million, Sarah. Your spreadsheet will cost some hours of work and maybe some embarrassment. Mine cost enough to buy 100 houses. But you had experience, knew what you were doing. I had nothing. I pretended I knew. I signed with fear, hoping it would work out, and it went wrong. He leaned forward. Do you know what my mother told me? Great. Now you learned how to do auditing, and I learned the most expensive way possible, but I learned. Sarah didn't know what to say. Michael continued, You'll make mistakes again. I will too. The difference between good and bad professionals isn't that good ones don't make mistakes. It's that good ones learn. So tell me, did you learn? I learned. I'll check 3 times before saving any spreadsheet. Then done. Move forward. But there was something in Sarah's expression that said it wasn't just that. Michael waited. Finally, she spoke. I received a letter yesterday, anonymous, saying that I should leave before I humiliate myself more. Michael's jaw contracted. Who? I don't know. It wasn't signed. Show me. Sarah hesitated, but took the crumpled paper from her purse. Michael read silently, and with each line his expression became harder. When he finished, he did something unexpected. He tore the letter into tiny pieces and threw it in the trash. Coward, he said simply. Anyone who writes anonymous letters doesn't have the courage to own their opinion. But what if they're right? What if I'm embarrassing you? Michael looked her in the eyes. Do you think I would do all this if I didn't believe in you? Do you think I would face the board, lose contracts, endure pressure from all sides out of pity? Then why? The question hung in the air. Michael didn't answer immediately. He himself wasn't sure of the complete answer. Was it about justice? About changing the company? About proving something to himself? Or was it about Sarah specifically? About the way she had seen him at his worst moment and hadn't judged? About how the triplets had consoled him without asking for anything in return? About how, for the first time in years, he had felt part of something real, not just a corporate structure. Because you reminded me of who I wanted to be, he said finally. And because I see in you something that half the people in this company have lost. Honesty. You don't pretend. Don't use masks. You are who you are, and that's rare. Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something more complicated, more dangerous. It was admiration mixed with something she didn't want to name. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me. Just keep trying. That's all I ask." There was a moment of silence between them, charged with something unspoken. Michael broke first, clearing his throat and returning to a professional tone. "And there's something else. I want you to help me with a project." "Me? But..." "It's about internal communication. We need a better way to connect departments, to make people feel heard. You have a way with people, Sarah. They trust you. I've seen it. So I want you to think about how we could create these channels. It doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be honest." For the first time that day, Sarah smiled. A small smile, but real. "I can try. That's all I need." In the following weeks, something began to change in the company's dynamics. Michael created monthly meetings where employees from all levels could speak directly with the board. They were uncomfortable meetings at first, with awkward silences and timid questions, but gradually people began to speak truthfully. Sarah coordinated these meetings. At first, it was just organizational, but Michael realized she had a gift for making people feel safe. She didn't judge, didn't interrupt, just listened, and then translated those concerns into language the board could process. It was at one of these meetings that a maintenance employee raised his hand. "I just wanted to say something. I've worked here for 15 years. I've seen 3 presidents, and this is the first time I feel like someone really cares about us. I don't know if everything you're doing will work out, but thank you for trying." There was silence and then applause. Not rehearsed, not forced, genuine. Michael looked at Sarah from across the room. She had tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. And he realized that that small and imperfect moment, was worth more than any $1,000,000 contract. But not everything was light. Patricia requested a private meeting with Michael a few days later. When he entered her office, he found a resignation letter on the desk. "You're resigning." "I am." Patricia's voice was firm, emotionless. "I worked with your mother for 20 years. I believed in what she built, but this..." She gestured vaguely. "This is no longer that company, and I can't pretend I believe." Michael sat down slowly. "You disagree with the changes. I disagree with the naivety. You're creating expectations you won't be able to maintain, and when everything collapses, it will be worse, because you gave people hope. What if it doesn't collapse?" "It will collapse. It always collapses." Patricia sighed, and for the first time seemed tired. "I'm not bad, Michael. I'm just realistic, and realistically companies like this don't survive. Then let me try to prove you're wrong. No, because I don't want to be here when you prove I'm right." She stood up. "Some employees will leave with me. Good people. competent, people who think like me, and it will be chaos for a few weeks, but it's better this way. Better for me, better for you. Michael didn't try to convince her. He knew it would be useless. You've always been exceptional at what you do. I hope you find a place where you'll be happy. I was happy here, until you changed everything. She left, and took with her 5 high-level employees. The news spread like fire, and for 2 days the company seemed on the verge of collapse. Meetings were cancelled, processes stalled, chaos was tangible. But then something unexpected happened. People began to organize themselves. Employees from other sectors offered to temporarily cover gaps. Sarah, who barely understood half the processes, spent nights awake learning to provide support where Patricia had left emptiness. And slowly, piece by piece, the company began to rebuild itself. Not as it was before, but as something new, something that didn't have a name yet, but had soul. Winter came to Chicago, bringing fine, cold rains that seemed endless. The company was in transition, still reeling from Patricia's departure and part of the team, but also discovering new rhythms. Michael had promoted people from within, some without formal experience for the positions, but with willingness to learn. It was a bet, another one. Sarah took on responsibilities that 3 months ago would have seemed impossible. She wasn't officially a manager, but she coordinated teams, mediated conflicts, translated needs between sectors. She discovered she had talent for finding simple solutions to problems others complicated. And mainly, she discovered that people listened to her. It was on one of those rainy afternoons that it happened. Sarah was in Michael's office, reviewing a shift restructuring proposal, when she noticed he wasn't paying attention. He was looking out the window, expression distant, shoulders tense in a way she already recognized. He was carrying too much weight alone. "Mr. Roberts," he blinked, returning to the present. "Sorry, I was thinking." "About what?" Michael hesitated. Normally, he kept his worries to himself, but something in that moment made him be honest. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the fact that Sarah was one of the few people who didn't expect him to have all the answers. "I have a board meeting tomorrow. They're going to question everything. Castelar's departure, Patricia's departure, the costs of new programs, and I'm not sure I can convince them it's worth it." "Do you think it's worth it?" "I do. But numbers don't lie, Sarah. We're still in the red. Changes will take time to show financial return, and patience isn't something boards have much of." Sarah was silent for a moment, thinking. Then, with courage that surprised herself, she said, "Can I suggest something? What if instead of numbers, you showed people?" Michael frowned. "What do you mean?" "The people who stayed, those who improved. Employees who used to just fulfill schedules and now offer to help. That doesn't show up on spreadsheets, but it's real. The board doesn't care about that. Then maybe they need to care." Sarah leaned forward, animated now. "You always talk about changing the company, but the board is also part of it. Maybe they need to understand what we're really building." Michael looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. There was something in the simplicity of her logic that unsettled him, maybe because it was exactly the kind of thinking he had lost over the years, buried under layers of strategy and pragmatism. "Would you come with me? To the meeting?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Me? No, Mr. Roberts, I have nothing to do in a board meeting. You have everything to do. You're proof that this works." He stood up, determined now. "You came from cleaning to coordination in months, learned everything from scratch, and you're making a real difference. If I can show that, show you, maybe they'll understand. But what will I say? I don't know how to speak nicely, I don't know." "Speak the way you always speak, honestly, that's all I need." Sarah felt pure panic. The idea of entering a room full of powerful executives, people who decided the fate of entire companies, made her stomach turn. But there was something in Michael's look, a mixture of confidence and vulnerability that prevented her from refusing. "Okay, I'll go." The night before the meeting, Sarah couldn't sleep. She mentally rehearsed what she would say, but all the sentences seemed inadequate. The triplets noticed her anxiety and in their peculiar way tried to help. "Mummy, you just need to tell a story," said Grace with her usual seriousness. "What story?" "Sweetheart, our story, about when we lived in the small place and had little food, and you worked at night. And then the sad man helped you, and now we have food every day, and you stay with us." The childish simplicity was devastating. Sarah hugged all three tightly, feeling tears burn. That was it, that was all. A human story, simple, true. The next day, Sarah wore the most formal clothes she had, still simple, still modest, but clean and dignified. Michael picked her up personally, and on the way to the meeting room noticed she was trembling. "Breathe. You're not alone in there. I know, but what if I say something wrong? If I make things worse for you? Impossible. You just need to be yourself." The meeting room was intimidating. Enormous dark wood table, leather chairs, panoramic view of the city. 7 board members were present, all men over 50, expensive suits, closed expressions. Sarah felt like a lost child. Michael began the presentation. He talked about numbers, difficulties, but also cultural changes, increased productivity, reduced turnover. The board members listened with neutral expressions, difficult to decipher. "And now," said Michael, "I want you to hear someone who represents better than any graph what we're building. Sarah?" All eyes turned to her. Sarah stood up with wobbly legs, dry mouth. For a second she considered making up an excuse and running away. But then she remembered the triplets, Grace saying, "Tell our story." "Good afternoon. I'm not good with formal presentations, so I'll just tell how it was." And she told, without embellishments, without corporate jargon. She told about working at dawn, about bringing her daughters because she had no option, about the fear of not being good enough. She told about Michael offering a chance she didn't think she deserved, about making mistakes and learning, about discovering she could be more than she imagined. "I know that for you, this might seem like just a nice story," she said, her voice firmer now. "But it's not just about me. It's about all the people down there who now believe they can grow, that they can speak, that they matter, and people who believe work better, stay longer, give more. That's not on the spreadsheet yet, but it will be. I believe that." She sat down, heart beating erratically. The silence that followed seemed interminable. Then one of the board members, a grey-haired gentleman, cleared his throat. "How many years do you have with the company?" 6 months in this position, 2 years cleaning before. "And you think that in 6 months you can evaluate the sustainability of a business model?" Sarah swallowed hard. It was a trap, she knew, but she answered the only way she knew, with honesty. "No, sir, I can't. But I can say what I see every day. I see people arriving earlier, leaving later, not because they're forced to, but because they want to. I see people helping each other instead of competing. I see fewer people crying in the bathroom, and that has to be worth something, doesn't it?" The board member didn't respond, but something changed in his expression. It wasn't exactly approval, but maybe it was respect. The meeting continued for another hour. When it finally ended, Michael and Sarah left together. He was tense, impossible to read. "Did I mess up?" she asked quietly. "No, you were. Perfect. Will they support us? I don't know. But at least now they saw it's not just theory, it's real." 3 days later, the board made a decision. They would give Michael 6 more months. 6 months to prove the model worked financially. It wasn't complete victory, but it was time. It was a chance. And that afternoon when Michael told Sarah, she smiled, a tired but hopeful smile. 6 months. We can do a lot in 6 months. We can, agreed Michael, and for the first time in a long while, he really believed it. The following 6 months were a roller coaster of small victories and constant challenges. The company didn't transform overnight, but something fundamental had changed. People began to believe. Michael created an internal development program where employees could learn new skills during work hours. It seemed like luxury amid the financial crisis, but results appeared. Better prepared people, fewer operational errors, creative solutions coming from unexpected places. Sarah was officially promoted to Human Resources Coordinator. She didn't replace Patricia. Nobody could, and she didn't even try. But she created her own path, a more human HR, where people weren't just numbers on a payroll. She implemented a simple system. Once a week, someone from HR went down to the factory floor, to the cafeteria, to sectors that were normally invisible, and just talked, listened. The triplets became part of daily life, no longer hidden in a room, but present. Employees began greeting them by name, asking how school was. One of the secretaries, who had lost her daughter years ago, started bringing children's books for them. The entrance security guard taught magic tricks during snack times. "This isn't a corporate environment," complained one of the older directors. "No," agreed Michael, "it's better." The new partners who had been interested in the company's stance began generating concrete results. They weren't gigantic contracts, but they were solid, based on shared values, and they brought something money couldn't buy: reputation. The company began to be seen as a reference in humanized management. Michael was invited to speak at a leadership event. He almost refused, feeling like an imposter. After all, he was still in the middle of the process, still learning, still making mistakes. "Exactly why you should go," said Sarah when he shared his doubt. "People don't need a perfect leader. They need an honest leader." He went, and instead of talking about strategies and methods, he told his story. He spoke about the dawn when he almost destroyed 200 families, about 3 children who consoled him without understanding why, about the woman who made him remember that companies are made of people. He spoke about mistakes, fears, sleepless nights thinking he had ruined everything. The talk went viral, not because of successes, but because of vulnerability. Executives from other companies began making contact, wanting to know more, wanting to learn. "You became a reference," said Sarah, showing her phone with dozens of messages. "We became one," corrected Michael. "This wasn't just me. It was on one of those days, 3 months before the final deadline given by the board, that Michael had an idea, a risky, symbolic, but necessary idea." He called Sarah to his office. There was something different in his expression, a mixture of nervousness and determination. "I need to show you something." He opened an old drawer and took out a yellowed folder. Inside, the contracts he had almost sent months ago, the mass layoffs, the documents that would change everything. "I never showed you this, but this was what I was going to do that night. Fire more than 200 people. It was all ready. I just needed to hit send." Sarah looked at the papers, and the gravity of what he was saying hit her. 200 families. She could have been one of them if she worked in another sector. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because I want to destroy it, really. Not just file it, but completely erase it, and I wanted you present when I do it." He took her to a small room in the basement, where the confidential document incinerator was. It was a cold, industrial space, nothing symbolic, but it was perfect. Michael held the documents. "These papers represent everything I almost was, and decided not to be. They represent the leader my mother didn't raise, and I don't want them to exist anymore, not even as a reminder." He put the documents in the incinerator. Sarah stood beside him, and together they watched the paper burn, turn to ash, disappear. When the last embers went out, Michael realized he was crying. Not from sadness, but from relief. It was a weight he had carried since that dawn, and only now did he realize how heavy it was. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse, "for appearing that night, for bringing them, for reminding me." Sarah held his hand without thinking. It was a simple gesture, human, without ulterior motives, just two survivors recognizing each other. "We saved each other a little, I think," as she said quietly. They stayed there for a few more minutes, in silence, in the basement of a company that was learning to breathe again. When the board's deadline arrived, the numbers weren't spectacular, but they were positive. The company had come out of the red, not with huge margins, but with sustainable growth. More importantly, turnover had dropped 80%. Productivity had increased. And surprisingly, other companies were beginning to want partnerships precisely because of the reputation the company was building. At the final meeting, the same grey-haired board member who had questioned Sarah months ago spoke. "When you proposed these changes, Roberts, I thought it was madness. Idealism from someone who doesn't understand the market." He paused. "I was wrong. Not completely, I still think it's risky, but wrong enough." It was the closest to a compliment Michael would get from that man, and it was enough. The company didn't become a fairy tale. There were still problems, conflicts, difficult days, but there was also something that didn't exist before: hope. People woke up and came to work without that weight of being disposable. They came because they belonged. On a spring afternoon, Michael created a space within the company. It wasn't big, just a room with plants, natural light, some comfortable chairs. A place where people could go when they needed to breathe, think, or simply exist without producing. At the silent inauguration, no speeches, no pomp, he put a small plaque on the door: Claire Roberts Space. His mother's name. Not as a funeral memorial, but as a celebration of the values she had planted and that were finally blooming. The triplets were the first to enter. They ran among the plants, laughed with the echo of the empty room, and then Grace, always the most observant, looked at Michael. "It's beautiful here. You can be happy here." "Yes, you can," he agreed. And for the first time in a long while, he completely believed it. Sarah watched from afar, with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Peterson was beside her, wearing her best dress for the occasion. "You did well not to give up," said the old woman. "We did well," corrected Sarah. "Me, him, everyone who stayed." That night, after the triplets fell asleep, Sarah went to the drawer where she kept the letter she had never delivered, the letter where she gave up. She read it one last time, then tore it into small pieces. She didn't need it anymore. Didn't need that version of herself who thought she didn't deserve to be in certain places. Michael, in his empty apartment, opened his mother's diary and wrote for the first time on the blank pages at the end, "Mom, I understood. It took time. It took mistakes. It took almost losing everything. But I understood. A company isn't the building, isn't the profit, isn't the name on the facade. It's people. It always was people. And as long as I remember that, as long as I protect the names behind the numbers, we'll be okay. Thank you for teaching me this, even when I stubbornly refused to learn." The next day, the company functioned as always. People arrived, worked, talked, laughed, complained, lived. But there was something different in the air, something that had no exact name, but everyone felt belonging. Michael passed through the cafeteria and greeted the kitchen staff by name. He rode the elevator talking to the security guard about the weekend football game. He passed by HR and saw Sarah explaining something to a new employee with infinite patience. The triplets were drawing in the corner, already part of the landscape. He entered his office and for the first time in months didn't feel that crushing weight. Not because problems had disappeared, there would always be problems, but because now he knew he wasn't alone carrying them. The company was breathing. People belonged. And it had all started on a dawn, when a collapsing man was consoled by 3 children who called him Sad Man, and decided he didn't want to be that man anymore. He looked out the window, Chicago spreading out below, full of lives, stories, possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, Michael Roberts smiled. A small, tired but genuine smile, a smile from someone who had finally found the way home. End of the narrative.